Good evening and welcome to our first episode of Beef Tips and Gravy. We're glad to have you with us this evening and glad to have with me today Todd Steen, a ruminant nutritionist for ProTrition Feed. Todd has spent his entire career as a ruminant nutritionist, working all over the Midwest and Southeast, working with ruminant animals. And so, Todd, we're glad to have you here today. We want to spend our time today in this session talking about finishing cattle. There's a lot of folks out there that want to finish their own cattle, take it to a privately owned slaughterhouse. Maybe some people are even going to a USDA inspected facility and selling their meat. But let's say we want to do that. What are some things right high level that we need to consider before we really start thinking about finishing a beef calf?
Well, of course, we need the facilities. We need to have a place for them to be somewhat confined. They don't need to be, running over 50 acres and running all their finish off. They need to be somewhat confined. Have plenty of water. That we need to say that right off the bat. Got to have plenty of water. And when we start talking about finishing rations, we're talking about relatively low fiber, low roughage type rations, type diet, where it's a very high energy, more of a grain type finishing program.
So we keep that in mind, and we've got these cattle, and I know genetics plays into what's going to happen at the end, but be that as it may, we want these cattle to grade. Typically we'll want them to get into that choice grade somewhere. And so if we have that in mind, how important is the crude protein aspect, and how do we really need to weigh out crude protein? Everybody buys feed, 16% crude protein's got to be better than 12. So give us some pointers on where crude protein.
Well, protein is always important. Crude protein really doesn't define a whole lot, but with the terminal animal, when we start talking about finishing, protein really isn't the biggest nutrient that we really care about. It's energy. And remember, the finishing phase, we have pretty much got the calf grown. His growth cycle is more flattening out to the point to where the muscle accretion and protein deposition is going down and fat deposition is going up. And protein will do us no good from putting down fat, particularly not putting down interstitial fat to get the animal to grade. So we want that energy content in there to be able to put the cover on. And that's generally what we're talking about with finish. We're talking about putting the fat cover on for the carcass. Remember, that's where the juiciness and the flavor and all that of the carcass comes from is really the fat content. So when we start looking at how these cattle are going to cut their ribeye area, and if we're going to have enough marbling to be able to get them into the choice grade, generally that's looking at 0.4% back fat, and it's kind of how you subjectively evaluate the animal that says that maybe they have a chance to be able to grade that low choice, or to be able to have enough marbling to be able to get there. So energy is going to drive the boat here. That's going to be the main thing. And remember, we are talking about a terminal animal. So our fortifications become less severe and less stringent on us at that time. One other thing to keep in mind that as that animal is growing and getting larger, and we're talking about with today's genetics or typical type genetics, we're talking about a 12 finishing off at somewhere between 12 to 1350, 1400 pounds. Think about how much that animal can consume and from a dry matter perspective there. And so if they can eat that much, then the concentration of nutrients become diluted out over that feed intake. So the amount of vitamin mineral becomes really a low portion to fortifying the diet. So energy becomes really the thing that we want to do. And water. I always remember water.
So when we talk about energy, I just wanted to mention for our viewers, we have protein very plainly marked on a feed tag. and energy is a little harder for a consumer to determine, while we can, we know those numbers. Those of us that manufacture feed, we know those numbers, but it's really not on the feed tag. So as a consumer, and I want to finish some calves, 1, 3, 5, whatever, what do I need to do to determine, hey, I need this energy level or more? How am I going to know that?
Well, if you look at the feed tag, the reason why you don't see energy on there is because you cannot directly measure it. You can indirectly get there, but it's not like crude protein that you can directly measure protein or calcium or fiber for that matter. But energy is not that easy to do. So hence it's not required from a guarantee. So how do we determine that? You can kind of determine it by a few rules. Fiber and energy are generally inversely related, meaning that the higher the fiber, the lower the energy, and vice versa. That's one thing. And then we also know that the grains that we typically are going to be offering them, corn, we know that that's a higher energy type ingredient than, say, compared to hays or some other kind of pasture and what have you. So from that aspect of it, we can kind of determine a little bit. So right off the bat, our highest energy diet that we're going to have is basically going to be pure corn, or in the tenderloin feeding regime, whole corn and pellets will give you the highest energy and give you the best opportunity to finish at a quick feeding period there. So even though energy determination is not all that easy, there are a few things that you can try to look at. But one of the things right off the bat, when we start getting towards finishing the animal, for getting time frame to get finished the animal, we start talking about adding more grain to it to increase that energy. Adding more grain and lowering the amount of fiber and the amount of forage that we'll be offering.
So before we wind up here for our viewers, I got 2 more questions for you, Todd. One in particular is, where does forage fit with these finishing cattle, be it hay or pasture, or even any other forage stuff? Where does that fit in a finishing ration?
It still fits. It's just not as predominant as an inclusion rate compared to the other grains. Now, when you offer whole corn and pellets, the whole kernel of corn will mimic and will act like the way forage or roughage does with the animal, meaning that it sparks rumination and sparks the chewing, aspect for the animal. But when it gets right down to it, we still are going to have a little bit of roughage to keep the animal healthy. Even though we're talking about a terminal sire, our terminal animal, not terminal sire, terminal animal, we still have to keep them healthy and still have to have some animal welfare to them so that he doesn't get sick. So we have to have a little bit. Now, one of the things that we do get a lot of questions on is, in today's environment, what about finishing an animal on forage or having a pure pasture finishing regime? To be able to do that, you would have to obviously have excellent forage quality. But from an energy perspective, we know that our forages in this area don't carry the energy content or the digestibility to be able to put that high energy out there. So our days on feed there is going to get stretched out, and we have to be careful that we can still hit the animal in a maturity for the carcass to be able to get them in a finished weight. A lot of people want to see less fat on the carcass and have in the type of fat that you would see with a heavy forage, high forage type finishing ration. There is evidence for health issues, the linoleic acid or conjugated linoleic acid, particularly from the fats, that you would see more from a finishing program with forage. You would see more of that, but you will have a longer days on feed to be able to get the animal there to have some semblance of finish to him because of the lower energy that you would see with the roughage. But please understand, a little bit is okay. A little bit goes a long way in a finishing ration. So So you don't need very much, but it's still going to be important to put in there.
Well, you answered my last question was about finishing cattle on grass, because grass-fed beef, there's a niche market for that. Certainly, folks want to do that, and that's great. But you answered that question and the differences that were involved.
We do get a lot of inquiries about doing that, and I know there are a few within the state that promote that and do it. But please bear in mind that forage quality is, in that instance, is going to be very large to be able to get it accomplished.
Absolutely. Well, let me thank you, Todd, for being with us today on this episode of Beef Tips and Gravy. We certainly appreciate your time and effort and all your expertise as a ruminant nutritionist. Thank you, and we hope you'll check back with us each month as we have an episode of Beef Tips and Gravy. Thank you for being with us.